Perfection has a sound. On this particular Saturday afternoon, it sounded like the smooth, intricate guitar licks of Steely Dan's Peg. It had a smell, too. A complex bouquet of freshly cut grass, sizzling ground chuck on the grill, and the faint, hoppy aroma of the IPA sweating in my hand. This wasn't just a backyard. It was my Sistine Chapel, and I was on my back on a lounger, admiring the ceiling. I'd spent the better part of 2 years and a significant chunk of my freelance web developer salary transforming this quarter-acre of suburban potential into a bona fide sanctuary. The deck was custom-built from ipe wood, a material so dense it laughs at the concept of weather. The grass was a specific blend of Kentucky bluegrass and fescue that felt like a high-pile carpet underfoot. The landscape lighting was all smart home integrated, capable of producing a gentle, welcoming glow with a simple voice command. My pride and joy, however, were the speakers. A set of 4 discrete, high-fidelity outdoor speakers, wired through the soffits and calibrated to create a perfect soundstage right around the grilling area. The volume was, in a word, tasteful. I had my phone out earlier and, for my own amusement, checked it with a decibel meter app. We were peaking at a roaring 55 decibels, roughly the sound level of a quiet conversation or a high-end refrigerator. It was background music, an auditory texture designed to elevate the experience of turning a $12 pack of ground beef into 4 magnificent burgers. It was civilized. My kingdom was bordered on the east by a meticulously maintained 6-foot privacy fence. To the west, however, it was bordered by Carol. Carol's house was a beige box, identical to mine, but where my home felt lived in, hers felt curated. Her lawn was an unnerving, uniform green carpet that looked like it was maintained by Swiss watchmakers on a diet of pure rage and fertilizer. And her kitchen window, which overlooked my deck, served as the observation deck of the panopticon. I often felt a strange prickling on my neck, a sixth sense that told me I was being observed, my grilling technique judged, my choice of music catalogued. Carol wasn't just a neighbor, she was a warden, and I was the inmate in the world's most comfortable minimum security prison. I took a long pull of my beer and closed my eyes, letting the music wash over me. For a few blissful moments, there was no fence, no beige house, no warden. There was only the sun, the sizzle, and the sound. It was perfect. And, like all perfect moments, it was about to be ruined. Section 1.2. The confrontation. I saw the motion first. A flicker of beige in my periphery. The sliding door to her deck hissed open, a sound that cut through the smooth jazz rock like a rusty blade. My shoulders tensed instinctively. I didn't turn my head, hoping that if I remained perfectly still, she might lose track of me, like a T-Rex. No such luck. The soft thud of her orthopedic clogs on my deck boards announced her arrival. I sighed, opened my eyes, and sat up. "Hi, Alex," she said. Her voice was thin and tight, a wire pulled taut and about to snap. "Enjoying yourself?" The way she said enjoying made it sound like I was juggling puppies over a live volcano. "Trying to, Carol. Beautiful day for it, right? Can I get you a burger? They're just about ready." I employed my customer service smile, the one I reserved for difficult clients and DMV employees. She ignored the offer, her eyes scanning my deck like she was looking for code violations. Her gaze landed on one of the speakers, tucked discreetly under the eaves. "It's the noise," she said. Her lips pursed into a little knot of disapproval. "It's very persistent." Persistent, that's what she called it. Not loud, not obnoxious. Persistent. As if Donald Fagen had personally decided to haunt her afternoon. "Oh, the music," I said, feigning surprise. "Sorry, is it too loud? I can barely hear it over the grill." It's the bass, she said, as if she were a seasoned audio engineer. The low frequencies. They travel, you know, right through my walls. It's very disruptive to the peace and quiet. I had to hand it to her. It was a masterful performance. She spoke with the grave authority of someone reporting a chemical spill. I picked up my phone from the small table beside my lounger. You know, it's funny you say that, I said, tapping open the decibel meter app. I held it up. The little needle was bouncing between 54 and 56. See? We're registering at about the volume of a normal conversation. I think my air conditioner is actually louder than this when it kicks on. She stared at the phone screen as if it were a piece of alien technology I had just used to insult her mother. I don't need a gadget to tell me what I can hear with my own ears, Alex. It is a constant thumping nuisance. Thumping? Steely Dan? Had she ever even listened to the song? There was more thumping in a library. This was the moment of choice. I could be a doormat, or I could be a man grilling in his own backyard. My inner monologue, which sounded suspiciously like my dad, was screaming, "Don't let her win, son! This is your hill. Die on it." But I was also a man who hated conflict. All right, Carol, I sighed, the sound of my own defeat tasting like bitter hops. I tapped my phone, lowering the volume until the music was barely audible even to me. Better? She listened for a moment, her head cocked. A flicker of triumph flashed in her eyes. "It's a start," she said, delivering the line with the finality of a judge's gavel. She then turned, her clogs making a soft, victorious thump-thump-thump on my expensive ipewood, and disappeared back into her beige box. I stood there in the ringing silence, the only sound now the sad, lonely sizzle of the burgers. The perfection was gone. The sanctuary had been breached. This wasn't just a complaint about noise. This was a declaration of war, and she had just won the first battle. Section 1.3. The seed of an idea. I stabbed a spatula into a burger with more force than was strictly necessary. I ate standing up, my jaw tight, the delicious meal ruined by the bitter aftertaste of capitulation. I cleaned the grill, put everything away, and retreated inside my house. The silence of my own backyard now feeling oppressive and alien. I grabbed my phone and called the one person who would understand the profound injustice I had just suffered. My best friend Dave. "You did what?" Dave's voice crackled through the speaker. I had him on FaceTime, and I could see his face contorted in a mask of theatrical disbelief. He was in his apartment, surrounded by turntables and milk crates full of vinyl. Dave was a professional DJ, a man whose entire life revolved around the sacred art of making noise. "I turned it down," I mumbled, slumping onto my couch. "She said it was the low frequencies." "The low frequencies? Of Steely Dan? What is she, a bat? Does she have supersonic hearing? You can't let her win, dude. This is America. A man's right to listen to yacht rock in his own backyard is like in the Constitution, probably. Look it up." "It's not in the Constitution, Dave." "It should be. It's an unalienable right. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of tastefully curated background music. This is tyranny, Alex. Petty suburban tyranny." He was right. That's exactly what it felt like. All that work, all that money, to create my own little slice of heaven, only to have it held hostage by the whims of a woman who probably considered the hum of a ceiling fan to be a public nuisance. "I just can't enjoy my own property," I vented, pacing my living room. "I can't have people over for a barbecue without worrying she's going to call in a SWAT team. It's insane. I wish I could just, I don't know, beam the music directly into my brain so she couldn't hear it." I stopped pacing. Dave, on the screen, had gone completely still. His mouth was slightly open, and his eyes had a far-off look, the way they did when he was about to drop a particularly filthy beat. A slow grin spread across his face. "Dude," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Say that again. What? That I wish I could beam it into my brain? Yes, Alex, my sweet, frustrated, suburban friend. You just gave me the most beautifully petty idea I have ever heard in my entire life. A silent disco? I repeated, the words feeling foreign and futuristic. You mean like with headphones? Exactly like with headphones! Dave was practically vibrating with excitement on my laptop screen. Think about it. The music is broadcast from a transmitter directly to wireless headphones. Everyone is in their own world, listening to crystal clear audio. But to anyone not wearing headphones, it's completely silent. She can't complain about noise if there is no noise. It's malicious compliance at its most technologically advanced. It's beautiful. He wasn't wrong. The sheer, unadulterated pettiness of it was breathtaking. It was a solution so perfectly tailored to the problem that it felt like a gift from the heavens. I could have a party, play music as loud as I wanted, and Carol's delicate ears would be completely undisturbed. She would be rendered powerless. The idea was so good it felt almost evil. I was in. Okay, I said, my own grin starting to match his. What do we need? What followed was one of the most satisfying shopping sprees of my life. Dave, the seasoned professional, screen-shared a dozen tabs from various pro-audio websites while I acted as the man with the credit card. We weren't just buying equipment, we were assembling an arsenal. Okay, first, the transmitter, he said, his cursor hovering over a sleek black box covered in dials. You don't want some cheap piece of crap? You need something with range, something that can handle multiple channels. This baby right here, the Silent Sounds TX3000, can broadcast on 3 separate channels up to 500 yards. Total overkill. Perfect. 3 channels? I asked. Yeah, so you can have, like, a yacht rock channel for you, an EDM channel for me, and, I don't know, a podcast channel for weirdos. It's about options, man. Freedom of choice. Into the cart it went. Next came the headphones. This was where Dave really got into the weeds. Now, this is important, Alex. You can't just get any wireless headphones. You need the ones designed for this. And critically, you need the ones that light up. Light up? Why do they need to light up? For the aesthetic and for the functionality. See these, the sound-selked Glow Fidelity 9S? They have LEDs on the side that change color based on the channel you're listening to. Blue for channel 1, red for channel 2, green for channel 3. It's how you know who your friends are. It's tribal. Plus, he added, a wicked glint in his eye, it will look really, really weird from your neighbor's window. He had a point. The visual component was an unexpected bonus. We started with a set of 20 headphones. It felt like a reasonable number for a small act of rebellion. The total in the online cart climbed at an alarming rate, but I clicked complete purchase with a sense of righteous purpose that made the cost feel trivial. This wasn't an expense, it was an investment in liberty. Over the next few days, boxes began to arrive. Sleek, black headphones, a transmitter that looked like it belonged in a spy movie, and a tangled hydra of charging cables. I spent an evening on my living room floor, unboxing everything, the smell of new electronics filling the air. I plugged the multi-port chargers into a power strip and carefully placed each of the 20 headsets into its charging cradle. The soft red glow of the charging indicators felt like the slumbering embers of my impending victory. I was no longer just Alex, the web developer. I was becoming Alex, the silent revolutionary. And I couldn't wait to fire the first completely inaudible shot. Section 2.2, the test run. The following Saturday, the stage was set. I invited Dave and about a dozen other friends over for what I cryptically billed as a revolutionary new barbecue experience. I gave them no other details. As they arrived, I handed each of them a pair of the sleek, futuristic-looking headphones. "What's this?" my friend Sarah asked, turning them over in her hands. "Is this a listening party for a new Beyoncé album?" "Something like that," I said with a smirk. "Put them on. Power button is on the right ear cup. Channel selector is on the left." I waited until everyone was geared up, then went over to the transmitter I had hooked up to my laptop and a multi-input mixer. Dave stood beside me, a giddy co-conspirator. I had 3 playlists ready to go. Channel 1, Blue, was my classic barbecue mix. Hall & Oates, the Doobie Brothers, and of course, Steely Dan. Channel 2, Red, curated by Dave, was an upbeat house music mix. Channel 3, Green, for variety, was a playlist of 90s hip-hop classics. "Ready to make some noise?" Dave whispered. "Ready to make some silence," I corrected him. I pressed play. The effect was instantaneous and deeply, profoundly weird. A dozen people on my deck who had been chatting a moment before suddenly went quiet. Then, a few heads started to nod. Sarah, on the Blue channel, started to sway gently, a blissful look on her face. Mark, a notorious dance machine, immediately started shuffling his feet, his headphones glowing a vibrant red. A small group by the cooler, all glowing green, simultaneously started doing a weak imitation of the Cabbage Patch. From my vantage point, it was the most surreal thing I had ever witnessed. It was a party, but the only sounds were the scuffing of shoes on the deck, the clinking of bottles, and the occasional, shockingly loud burst of out-of-key singing from someone completely lost in their own musical world. Someone would crack a joke, and instead of shared laughter, you'd see one person suddenly bark with laughter, while everyone else just looked at them, confused. It was bizarre. It was hilarious. And it was working. I glanced over at Carol's house. As if on cue, a curtain in her kitchen window twitched. I saw her face appear, her brow furrowed in confusion. She was clearly expecting the thumping bass of a traditional party. Instead, she saw a gathering of people twitching and jerking in utter silence, their heads blinking with multicolored lights. She looked like a scientist observing a newly discovered and deeply unsettling species of insect. She slid her window open, straining to hear the disturbance. Nothing. Just the gentle evening crickets and the sizzle of hot dogs on my grill. Her face cycled through a series of emotions: bewilderment, suspicion, and finally a deep, simmering frustration. Her power, her one weapon, the noise complaint, had been rendered utterly useless. I caught her eye from across the yard. I smiled the most cheerful, magnanimous smile I could muster. I raised my beer in a silent toast, then pointed to my own glowing blue headphones and gave her a jaunty little wave. I couldn't hear her reaction, of course, but the way she slammed her window shut told me everything I needed to know. The message had been received, loud and clear. Section 2.3, a new complaint. I was still riding the high of my victory the next morning. I replayed the previous night in my head. The silent dancing, the confused looks on my friends' faces turning to delight, and best of all, the image of Carol's face. A perfect portrait of impotent rage. I had found the perfect loophole. I had beaten the system. I was, I decided while pouring my coffee, a genius. A modern-day Sun Tzu of suburban warfare. My victory lap was cut short when I went to grab the morning paper from my front porch. There, taped to my front door at precisely eye level, was a single sheet of crisply folded white paper. It wasn't an envelope. It was a note, folded with an unnerving precision, as if by a machine. I knew instantly who it was from. Carol wasn't the type for neighborly chats when a formal, passive-aggressive communique would do. I peeled the tape off and unfolded it. The note was handwritten in a tight, spiky cursive that looked like it had been carved into the paper with a needle. It read, "Alex, While I appreciate your newfound consideration regarding the auditory disruptions that have plagued this neighborhood, a new issue has arisen that requires your immediate attention. Your gathering last night, while silent, featured an excessive and disorienting display of flashing, multicolored lights. These intermittent illuminations continued well past a reasonable hour, creating a public nuisance and a significant distraction. The constant blinking is not only aesthetically displeasing, but is, frankly, a potential hazard for those sensitive to such visual stimuli. Please be a considerate neighbor and cease these distracting light shows immediately. We all have to live here. Sincerely, Carol Peterson. Lot 24? I read it once. Then I read it again, the words sinking in. My first reaction was disbelief. The lights? The tiny LEDs on the headphones? She was complaining about the lights? They weren't floodlights, they were barely bright enough to read by. I looked at one of the headsets sitting on my counter, its little LED now dark. A hazard? For whom? Moths? Then the disbelief melted away, replaced by a slow-burning, joyful realization. She couldn't complain about the noise, so she had pivoted. She had found a new front for our war. She thought she was checkmating me, but she had just handed me a brand new, even more ridiculous weapon. The complaint wasn't a setback, it was an invitation to escalate. She complained about my tasteful 55-decibel jazz music, so I took away the sound. Now she was complaining about my harmless blinking headphone lights. My mind started racing, a devilish grin spreading across my face. Oh, Carol, you think those are flashing lights? You sweet, simple summer child. You have absolutely no idea what I'm capable of. The arms race had just begun. Carol's note wasn't a deterrent, it was a blueprint. If she found the gentle pulsing of headphone LEDs to be a public nuisance, I was duty-bound to show her what a real nuisance looked like. My next trip wasn't to a pro-audio website, but to the seasonal aisle of a big-box hardware store and the dark corners of Amazon's party supply section. My initial foray into the world of illumination was modest, but pointed. I bought several strings of bright, color-changing LED party lights and crisscrossed them over my deck. I bought a cheap, mirrored disco ball and a single, focused pin spot to hit it with. My piece de resistance was a small, wheezing smoke machine I found on clearance, the kind used for Halloween parties. The following Friday, I hosted Silent Disco, the remix. The guest list was slightly larger this time, the novelty having spread through my friend group. The effect was immediately more dramatic. The crisscrossing lights cast shifting, chaotic patterns across the yard. The disco ball threw dazzling shards of light onto the trees and fences, and the smoke machine, chugging away in a corner, created a low-hanging haze that caught the light, making the entire deck look like a scene from a low-budget 80s music video. It was glorious, and it took exactly 47 minutes for the police to show up. I saw the flashing blue and red lights paint the front of my house before I heard the knock. I took off my headphones, handed over DJ duties to Dave, and went to answer the door. 2 officers stood on my porch. The first was older, with a thick mustache and a weary, deeply unimpressed look on his face that suggested he'd seen every form of human stupidity imaginable, and was currently witnessing a new, particularly vexing subspecies. His name tag read Miller. His partner was younger, taller, with a look of professional seriousness that was being actively undermined by the twitching at the corner of his mouth. His tag said Johnson. "Good evening," I said, leaning against the doorframe with a practiced casualness. "Something I can help you with, officers?" Miller sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 petty disputes. "Sir, we got a call about a disturbance at this address. Something about excessive noise and a rave." He said the word rave like it was something he'd stepped in. "A rave? I feigned a gasp. Here, heavens no. But please, come in, check for yourselves. Or, well, come on back. The party's in the yard. I led them through the house and onto the deck. The scene that greeted them was, I had to admit, profoundly weird. 30 people were dancing, bathed in swirling, multicolored light and a thick cloud of artificial fog, all in dead silence. Officer Johnson's professional composure finally broke. A small snort escaped his nose. He quickly disguised it as a cough. Miller's tired eyes swept over the silent, gyrating crowd, the disco ball, the chugging smoke machine. He looked back at me. His expression was a flat, unreadable mask of pure exasperation. "Right," he said. "So the noise complaint seems unfounded." "Noise? Officer, feel free to listen," I said, gesturing grandly to the silent yard. "We're being extremely considerate of the neighborhood's peace and quiet." Johnson was now actively fighting a losing battle with laughter, watching a guy in a Hawaiian shirt attempt to do the robot to a silent beat. Miller pinched the bridge of his nose, hard. "The complaint also mentions the lights. Says it looks like an airport runway is trying to land in your backyard." "My party decorations?" I asked, all innocence. "Are my Christmas decorations out of season, officer? I wasn't aware of any city ordinance on tasteful ambiance." "I can assure you everything is UL listed and perfectly safe." Miller stared at me for a long, heavy moment. I could see the internal calculus happening behind his eyes. He was weighing the mountain of paperwork this would generate against his profound desire to get back in his car and pretend this never happened. The desire to get back in his car won. "Look, sir," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Technically, you're not breaking any laws. There's no noise. The lights are on your own property. But you and I both know what's going on here." He gestured with his head toward Carol's house. "You're in a pissing match with your neighbor, and right now you're wasting city resources. Knock it off." It wasn't an order, but it was a clear warning. "I'll take it under advisement, officer," I said respectfully. "See that you do," he grumbled. He turned to leave, Johnson following close behind, his shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. As they walked away, I heard Miller mutter to his partner, "Of all the calls, silent discos. I'm too old for this." I closed the door, a triumphant grin spreading across my face. I had faced the law, and the law had shrugged and walked away. It was a major victory, but Miller's words echoed in my head. A pissing match. He was right. And if you're going to be in a pissing match, you might as well bring a fire hose. It was time to call in a professional. Section 3.2, calling in a professional. My amateur light show was child's play. I knew it. And after the police visit, I knew I needed to up my game to a level that was both undeniably impressive and, somehow, still technically legal. I needed someone who understood the fine art of spectacular illumination. I found him on a local online marketplace, listed under Event Production and Lighting. His name was Gus. Gus arrived the next day in a slightly battered Ford F-250 that looked like it had survived a war. He was a burly man in his 40s, with a magnificent, wild beard, a faded band t-shirt, and a carpenter's pencil tucked behind his ear. He moved with a surprising grace for a man his size, and his eyes, sharp and intelligent, took in my entire backyard setup in a single, sweeping glance. I walked him through the story, the initial complaint, the silent disco concept, the police visit, and my grand ambition. I expected him to be bemused, maybe even a little judgmental. Instead, his beard split into a wide, appreciative grin. "So, let me get this straight," he said, his voice a low rumble. He pointed a thick finger at Carol's house. "You want a full concert-level light rig for a bunch of people dancing in silence, specifically to piss off the lady in the beige house?" "That's the gist of it," I confirmed. He let out a loud, booming laugh that startled a bird out of a nearby tree. "I love it," he declared, clapping me on the shoulder with a hand the size of a catcher's mitt. "This is the most honest job I've had all year. Usually people want elegant uplighting for a magical evening. This is pure. I can work with this." Gus was more than a contractor. He was an artist, and my backyard was his new canvas. He walked the perimeter, humming to himself, his eyes calculating angles and distances. "Okay, here's what I'm thinking," he said, pulling the pencil from behind his ear and grabbing a napkin from my patio table. "We can mount a lightweight aluminum truss right here, between these two trees. Gives us a nice high point. From there we can hang a dozen par cans, programmable LEDs, full color spectrum. We can make them pulse, strobe, fade, whatever you want." He was sketching furiously on the napkin, his pencil flying. "Then over here, we get some moving heads, little robot lights. We can have them sweep across the yard, make patterns on the fence. And for the finale," his eyes gleamed with a mad, creative fire, "you got the budget for a laser?" I felt a thrill shoot through me. "A laser?" "Oh yeah, nothing crazy, not like slice a plane in half stuff, but a nice little animation laser. We can project patterns onto the back of your house, into the smoke. It'll look epic, totally pro." We spent the next hour geeking out over the plans. Gus was a fountain of knowledge, talking about DMX controllers, power distribution, and something called lumens, with the passion of a sommelier describing a fine wine. He was a connoisseur of light. He understood that this wasn't just about being bright. It was about creating a spectacle, an experience. He also gave me some practical advice. "Now, the fuzz was already here once," he said, getting serious for a moment. "And the HOA is going to be your next problem. So everything we do has to be temporary. The truss is freestanding. The lights clamp on. We run the power from dedicated outdoor circuits so you don't blow every fuse in your house. At the end of the night, we can have most of this broken down in an hour. Temporary. That's the key. It's an event. Not a permanent fixture. You get me?" I got him completely. He wasn't just providing equipment. He was providing a strategy. He saw the legal battlefield with perfect clarity. We shook on it. His quote was, "significant." It was more than I had spent on my couch. But as I watched him drive away in his behemoth of a truck, I didn't feel a shred of buyer's remorse. I felt like a general who had just hired the world's greatest siege engineer. The next battle was coming, and this time I was bringing artillery. Section 3.3, the HOA enters the fray. While Gus and I were plotting our luminous masterpiece, Carol was mobilizing. My low-tech light show had been a nuisance. The sight of a professional contractor surveying my yard was, to her, an existential threat. Her campaign escalated from passive-aggressive notes to a full-blown intelligence-gathering operation. I'd catch her peering through her blinds, her phone held up to the glass, no doubt documenting Gus's every move. She started taking casual walks down the sidewalk whenever I was outside, her pace slowing to a crawl as she passed my property line. Once, I saw her talking to another neighbor, Mr. Henderson, from across the street, pointing animatedly at my house. Mr. Henderson just nodded, a pained look on his face. Clearly a man who wanted nothing to do with the escalating conflict. Carol was building her case. She was no longer a lone wolf. She was attempting to form a coalition of the annoyed. The inevitable escalation arrived via certified mail a week later. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope with the official letterhead of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. My stomach did a little flip-flop. This was the big leagues. I tore it open. The letter inside was 3 pages of dense, bureaucratic jargon, a weaponized assault of legalese and polysyllabic words. It talked about maintaining community aesthetic standards, preventing public and private nuisances, and the sacred importance of protecting property values. The relevant paragraph was highlighted in yellow. Therefore, pursuant to Article 7, Section B of the Oakwood Estates Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions, you are hereby ordered to immediately cease and desist any and all activities involving the use of non-standard external illuminations, including but not limited to strobe lights, colored floodlights, laser projection systems, and any lighting apparatus deemed excessive or disruptive by the Architectural Review Committee. It went on to outline a schedule of fines, starting at $100 per day and escalating to threats of property liens and legal action. It was signed by one Brenda Duval, HOA president. My heart sank. This was a direct hit. They had a committee and everything. This wasn't Officer Miller's weary resignation. This was an organized, well-funded adversary. I immediately called Dave, my legal and spiritual advisor in this conflict, and read the letter to him verbatim. "A cease and desist," he whistled. "Damn, Alex, you've officially made it. You're a suburban outlaw." "This isn't funny, Dave. They can fine me. Put a lien on my house. What am I supposed to do? Gus is supposed to deliver the trust tomorrow." Hold on, he said. "Don't panic. They hit you with Article 7, Section B. But what does the rest of it say? You still have that copy of the bylaws they gave you when you moved in?" I did. It was buried in the bottom of a filing cabinet. A thick, mind-numbingly boring document I had never actually read. That evening, we conducted a counterintelligence operation. With the HOA bylaws spread across my dining room table, fueled by pizza and beer, we went through the document line by line, searching for a loophole. It was grueling work. The language was designed to crush the human soul. But then, deep in a section about holiday decorations, Dave found it. "Here," he yelled, slapping the page. "Article 9, Section C, Temporary Decorations. Listen to this. Homeowners are permitted to erect temporary, non-permanent decorations for private events or recognized holidays, provided such decorations do not pose a safety hazard and are removed within 48 hours of the event's conclusion." I leaned in, my eyes scanning the text. He was right. The cease and desist letter cited the rule against permanent fixtures. But Gus's whole plan was based on everything being temporary. It was a loophole. A glorious, beautiful loophole. "And there's an online form on the HOA website to register a private event," Dave said, tapping on his laptop. "Just to, make sure the community patrol knows what's going on." A plan began to form. A final, defiant blaze of glory. We would use their own rules against them. I would register my private event. Gus would set up his temporary masterpiece. And I would host one last, massive, legendary party before Brenda Duval and her Architectural Review Committee could schedule a formal hearing. It would be the grand finale silent disco and light extravaganza. A final, luminous middle finger to the forces of beige oppression. The night of the party, my backyard was unrecognizable. It had been transformed. Gus and his two-man crew had spent the afternoon erecting a shimmering aluminum truss between the two large oak trees at the back of my property. It loomed over the deck like a piece of an alien spaceship. As dusk fell, they powered it on, and the yard exploded into a silent symphony of light. This wasn't just a few party lights anymore. This was a professional production. 12 programmable par cans bathed the yard in shifting waves of deep blues, purples, and reds. 4 robotic moving heads on either end of the truss swept intelligent patterns of light across the lawn and fences, their beams cutting sharp, dramatic lines through the thick haze pumped out by a new, professional-grade smoke machine. And then there was the laser. Gus had positioned it on the corner of my roof, and it was projecting a mesmerizing, slowly rotating green geometric pattern onto the back wall of my house. My humble suburban home looked like the main stage at a music festival. Word had spread. My initial invite list of 20 had ballooned. Friends had invited friends. I had nearly 60 people in my backyard, a silent army of dancers, their headphones glowing in the hazy, multicolored light. It was a sea of blinking red, green, and blue. I stood on my deck, a transmitter pack clipped to my belt, a beer in my hand, and surveyed the scene. The sheer, overwhelming absurdity of it all was intoxicating. All of this, the truss, the lasers, the 60 strangers dancing silently to 3 different playlists, was because one woman didn't appreciate the subtle genius of Steely Dan. My inner monologue was a chaotic mix of sheer terror and wild exhilaration. This was it, the point of no return. I had filed the private event permit on the HOA website that morning, citing a family and friends celebration. I had followed the letter of the law, stretched to its absolute breaking point. I had no idea what would happen, but I knew with absolute certainty that the night was young and Carol's phone was already in her hand. The calm was over. The storm was coming. Section 4.2. The confrontation. The first sign of trouble wasn't a knock on the door, but the distant, unmistakable wail of a siren. Then another. This time she hadn't just called the cops. I saw the flashing lights first, washing over the front of the house, painting the street in strobing bursts of red and blue. But this time there was yellow, too. The strobing yellow of a fire truck. My blood ran cold. She'd told them there was a fire. I took off my headphones, the sudden silence of the real world jarring after the music. I told Dave to keep things going and headed for the front yard, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My front lawn looked like a scene from a disaster movie. There was a police cruiser, parked at a sharp angle. And behind it, a massive, gleaming red fire engine, its lights blazing, taking up half the street. Neighbors were starting to poke their heads out of their doors, drawn by the commotion. Officer Miller climbed out of his cruiser, and the look on his face was not one of weariness. It was one of cold, controlled fury. He saw me and stormed over, his jaw set like granite. Before he could speak, a sensible sedan pulled up, and a stern-looking woman in a navy blue pantsuit got out. She was holding a clipboard like a weapon. Brenda Duval, HOA president, had arrived. And there, on her perfectly manicured lawn across the street, stood the architect of this chaos. Carol was in her bathrobe, her phone held aloft as she recorded the entire scene, a triumphant smirk on her face. It was a 3-front war, and I was surrounded. "A fire, Henderson?" Miller barked, getting right in my face. His voice was dangerously quiet. "She called in a fire. You know what the fine is for a false report to the fire department? You know how many real emergencies we could be at right now?" "Officer, I swear there is no fire," I said, holding my hands up. "It's a smoke machine. For ambiance. It's water-based vapor. It's harmless." "This is a flagrant violation of Article 7, Section B," Brenda Duval interjected, tapping her clipboard aggressively. "I have the cease and desist right here. This event is an unauthorized nuisance." "It's a rave!" Carol shrieked from across the street, her voice cracking with righteous indignation. "I saw it with my own eyes. There are probably drugs, and the lasers are a hazard to aircraft." The scene was pure, unadulterated chaos. Miller was yelling at me, Brenda was brandishing her clipboard, and Carol was providing a hysterical running commentary from her lawn. "It's not an unauthorized event," I finally yelled, finding my voice. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my hands shaking slightly, and brought up the confirmation email from the HOA website. "I filed for a temporary event permit this morning, Brenda. According to Article 9, Section C of your own bylaws, which I have right here, it's a private event with temporary decorations, all of which will be removed within 48 hours. Brenda snatched the phone from my hand, her eyes scanning the email, her expression souring. She knew I had her. The loophole was real. Just as she was about to argue some technicality, a new player entered the field. Mr. Henderson, my quiet neighbor from across the street, walked tentatively onto my lawn. He was a meek-looking accountant I'd only ever exchanged polite nods with. "Brenda," he said, his voice soft but clear. I think you should know something." Everyone turned to look at him. "That woman," he said, pointing a trembling finger at Carol, "has filed complaints against half the people on this block. She reported me to the city because my recycling bin was 6 inches too close to the curb. She called animal control on the Jacksons because their dog barked when the mailman came. She tried to get the HOA to fine the family at the end of the cul-de-sac because their son's basketball hoop was, and I quote, aesthetically displeasing. She's been terrorizing this neighborhood for years." A stunned silence fell over the lawn. Carol's jaw dropped. Brenda Duval looked from Mr. Henderson's earnest face to Carol's sputtering, guilty expression. The entire dynamic of the confrontation shifted on its axis. I was no longer the villain. The true agent of chaos had just been revealed. Section 4.3, the verdict. Officer Miller, who had been listening to Mr. Henderson's testimony with a new, dawning understanding, seemed to make a decision. He turned and walked purposefully across the street until he was standing on Carol's lawn. His voice was low, but in the sudden quiet, every word carried. "Ma'am, knowingly filing a false report with the fire department is a serious offense. A very serious offense. We have your number from the 911 call. If we get one more frivolous call from this address, about lights, about noise, about anything, we will be back, and we will be writing a very, very expensive ticket. Do you understand me?" Carol's face went white. She nodded silently, her triumphant smirk replaced by a mask of pure shock. Miller turned back, his gaze falling on me. He then looked at the fire truck, the silent party still inexplicably going on in my backyard, and Brenda Duval's clipboard. He let out a long, slow sigh. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is 7 Adam 12. Code 4, no fire. It's a fog machine. False alarm. We're clearing the scene." He then looked at Brenda and me. "This is a civil matter. You folks sort it out." With that, he climbed back into his cruiser and drove away, the fire engine following him down the street, taking the chaos and the flashing lights with it. The street was suddenly dark and quiet. It was just me, Brenda, and a shell-shocked Carol, who was slowly backing into her house. Brenda looked at my phone again, then at my house, then back at me. Her stern expression had softened into something resembling weary resignation. "Your reading of the bylaws is creative, Mr. Henderson," she said, handing my phone back. "And the light display is, frankly, absurdly excessive." She paused. "But technically, you are not in violation. The permit is valid." She took a deep breath. "However, the board will be reviewing the rules regarding temporary events at our next meeting. I would not expect this loophole to exist for much longer." It was a clear warning. My victory was temporary. She then looked over at Carol's house, where the front door had just clicked shut. "It also appears," she said, her voice tight with annoyance, "that the board needs to review its policies regarding nuisance complaints. Thank you for your time, Mr. Henderson." She turned on her heel, walked back to her sensible sedan, and drove away. I was left alone on my front lawn, the silence broken only by the faint, muffled sound of my own heart beating. The party was still going in the back. The lights were still flashing. The lasers were still tracing patterns in the fog. I had won. It was a bizarre, exhausting, and ridiculously expensive victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. An hour later, the party began to wind down. People started trickling out, patting me on the back, calling me a legend, still buzzing from the drama they had just witnessed. By 2 in the morning, the yard was empty, the headphones were collected, and the only light came from the single bulb on my back porch. Gus, true to his word, had shown up with his crew to break down the rig. As they expertly dismantled the truss and coiled thick cables, he walked over and handed me a cold beer from a cooler in his truck. "So," he said, taking a long sip from his own bottle. "That was something else. I've done festivals with less drama." I laughed, a tired, slightly hysterical sound. "You're telling me?" For a minute there, I thought I was going to be arrested for endangering air traffic. "Nah," Gus said with a wave of his hand. "She overplayed her hand. Classic rookie mistake. You, on the other hand, using the bylaws against them? That was a pro move. A real work of art." We stood in silence for a moment, watching his crew load the last of the moving heads into the truck. The yard looked shockingly normal again. Just grass and trees and a deck. The epic stage was gone. "So," Gus asked, a twinkle in his eye, "same time next week?" "God, no," I said, and I meant it. "I think I've made my point, and my electricity bill for this month is probably going to look like a phone number. This was a one-time performance." "A shame," he said, finishing his beer. "It was a hell of a show." He clapped me on the shoulder one last time, got in his truck, and rumbled off into the night, leaving me alone in my quiet, peaceful, and now legendary backyard. I looked over at Carol's house. It was dark, all the lights were off. It seemed even she had finally decided to call it a night. I reflected on the absurdity of the past few weeks. I never wanted to be a party host or a suburban rebel. I just wanted to listen to my music. But in a strange way, the battle had been more exhilarating than I cared to admit. Section 5.2. An unlikely truce. A week passed. The neighborhood returned to its sleepy, suburban rhythm. I received a formal-sounding email from Brenda Duvall, informing me that, as promised, the HOA bylaws concerning temporary events were under review. My loophole was closing, but it didn't matter. The war was over. That following Saturday, I found myself back in my sanctuary. It was another perfect afternoon. The sun was warm, the grill was clean, and a cold beer was in my hand. But this time there was no music. Not from the speakers, at least. I was just sitting on my lounger, reading a book in the glorious, peaceful silence. I saw movement next door and looked up. Carol was in her yard, tending to her rose bushes. She was wearing gardening gloves and a wide-brimmed sun hat. She must have felt me looking, because she straightened up and turned her head. Our eyes met across the expanse of our lawns. There was a long, silent moment. It wasn't friendly, not by a long shot, but it wasn't hostile either. It was a look of grudging acknowledgement, a silent understanding between two former adversaries. It was the look of two Cold War spies acknowledging each other across the Berlin Wall after the signing of a treaty. She knew what I was capable of, and I knew I had pushed things as far as they could possibly go. A new status quo had been established, one built not on friendliness, but on a foundation of mutually assured destruction. She wouldn't complain about my existence, and I wouldn't land a lighting rig in my backyard. It was a fragile, unspoken peace. She gave me a single, curt nod. Then she turned back to her roses. I smiled to myself. I reached down and picked up the pair of high-end, noise-canceling headphones sitting beside me. Not the party headphones, just my personal ones. I slipped them on, connected them to my phone via Bluetooth, and pressed play. The smooth, effortless cool of Steely Dan's Aja filled my ears, a perfect soundtrack for a perfect afternoon, at a perfectly reasonable volume that only I could hear. I leaned back in my chair, took a sip of my beer, and looked over at Carol's house one last time. I raised the bottle in a small, silent toast that only I knew the meaning of. I had finally won back the peace in my own backyard. They say good fences make good neighbors. Turns out so do multi-channel wireless transmitters and a commercial-grade laser system. Who knew?